Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm doing my 1000 subscribers video. I think it was August of 2022 when I did my 100 subscribers video. I will put a link to that in the description, but at the time I just introduced myself and I said what I'm going to say today, which is I like reading. I thought, well, as long as I'm reading books, I might as well just hit record on a video camera for 10 minutes and share some of my thoughts about a book because I also very much enjoy BookTube and hearing what other people have to say about books. And I thought, well, I'll add my voice to the conversation. And that has just been toiling away. You can see not a lot of fancy professional thumbnails or video work. There's not any great graphics or music or sound effects clamoring in. I've just been doing a very low budget version. And that was intentional. Is I didn't plan on doing anything big with this, but I think where I shifted a little bit is obviously in the last few weeks, I had this review of The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine by Ilan Pappé get very viewed. It's still getting viewed and got lots of feedback from in all sorts of quarters for it. And so I think that I'm going to spend a little bit more time and some more money on this channel than I would have in the past, just to lean into that a bit. If this is what people would like to see, then I would like to provide more of that. And as I said in my last review, I'm going to do one book a month for all of 2024 on the Israel-Palestine issue, talking about different historical aspects, looking at different authors and learning more. So I hope to learn more with you. And if there's other books, both regarding Israel Palestine or any other books, please put them in the comments below that you'd like to see reviewed, and I will put them on the list and we'll see when we get to them. As far as the other books that we'll cover in the channel, I think you might see some books from behind me, or those are key books that are really important to me, books that I keep coming back to. So I might review some of those. Obviously, anything I'm reading at any given time, which varies wildly, I might pull from those, and then some nonfiction. I think that seems to be for the moment the most popular reviews on this channel. If I go back and look and see the previous highest review was something around 3,000 views, was posted 2 years ago. So that review was surpassed in the last few weeks by these different books that I've been reviewing. So that's what I'm hoping to do. I'm hoping to continue on, hoping to increase and better the production values and hopefully serve a larger audience, whoever wants to hear. Um, I just wanted to address something which had come up in the comments for the Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine video. And I think a number of people, however you want to put it, they were surprised, triggered, upset to see a Confederate battle flag in the background. And for them, there was this sort of dissonance that in their mind, someone who supports Palestinians must think a certain way and must feel a certain way about something. That's one side of it, and the other is they have a particular idea about what this flag means. And I pointed out somewhat jokingly, I said, well, nobody's upset about Paddington. A couple people seemed to be upset about the crucifixion. No one's upset about the London Underground uh, map, but they were very upset about this, and I don't know why. Um, well, let's say, sorry, I do know why, but I don't know why, knowing what I know. Okay, so I promised that I would address it in a future video, so this is my hope to address it, and then I will talk about it in the future. I'd start by saying there's a lot of myth that we're taught in American high school. So I attended high school in the United States, and one of the narratives, although to his credit, my AP US history teacher did not give us this narrative, but it's the narrative which a lot of my other friends were given. And it's something that is assumed in American culture, which is the North was full of do gooding white people who loved black people, who never owned any slaves, and wanted to, save the slaves. And the South was full of people like Leonardo DiCaprio's character in Django Unchained, and who hated black people and, wanted to do nothing but keep them down. I know that sounds ridiculous to say it that way, but that's the idea, and unfortunately, that's spread internationally as well. But history is not like that. History is not black and white, and there are so many facts that would fight this narrative. So I'll give you one, for example. Did you know that Cherokee Indians fought for the Confederacy from the early days of the war? that the last general to surrender, the last Confederate general to surrender was not Robert E. Lee, nor General Kirby Smith, who surrendered a month after General Lee, but General Stand Watie, who was a Cherokee, who surrendered 2 months after General Lee, and he had risen from a colonel to a brigadier general during the war. So the Cherokee signed a treaty with the Confederacy in 1861, I think, in which the Cherokees' claims that were supposed to be upheld by the Union were pledged to by the Confederacy. The Confederacy said they would honor those claims. So by this logic, are Cherokee black hating racists because they fought for that flag and they died for that flag? No. Are they traitors? No. They fought for something that they believed in. And that's the challenge of understanding history a little deeper than whatever the mainstream media or what you've heard in history class tells you, is that you can't just say that all people related to a certain subject, country, etc., are like that. And as I said in the Palestinian-Israeli thing, I don't think all Israelis want all Palestinians dead, and I don't think all Palestinians want Israelis dead. It's this mainstream media narrative that needs to create a binary narrative, and it's not that simple. On the other side, remember that the North is supposed to be this loving, wonderful thing towards Black people, but Blacks were not allowed to fight in the Union Army until 1862. And when they were used in working details, aka slaves. And it wasn't for another year or so that they were allowed to fight. If you don't believe me, you can go watch the movie Glory, which chronicles this. It's all based on historical fact. And Glory is hardly a pro-Confederate film, but it details the fact that Blacks were not accepted in the Union Army for years. And then only then, with pressure, were they allowed to fight on the front lines. And this war was ostensibly for them. Another thing that you have to realize, the Emancipation Proclamation by Abraham Lincoln did not free any slaves in the North. It only freed slaves in the South, which ostensibly Lincoln didn't have jurisdiction in because he wasn't in charge of the Confederacy at that time. Keep going with this, not so black and white, it's gray. Blacks who fought in the Confederacy, and this is, another mind-blowing thing, there were Blacks who fought in the Confederacy. The Confederacy didn't really start drafting Blacks until things were pretty desperate in 1865, but there were Blacks who fought in the Confederate Army. And if they were veterans, they were given this card which allowed them to use, unbelievably, the white-only facilities. So they could sit in the movie theater, they could use the water fountains, they could go to the restaurants, and they had this little card, and it was honored. And as ugly and as crazy as segregation was, you see this narrative of, oh, well, you fought for the Confederacy, so we're going to honor that even though you're Black. Because the idea that if you're Black, that's the problem. You have to see what happened at the end of the Civil War was harmful to everybody involved. It was harmful to the Blacks. They were told, you're free, but apart from a brief period from the Freedmen's Bureau, they weren't given the tools to take advantage of that freedom. The whites were told that they were, hateful, terrible people, and that they should, just kill themselves effectively. And that continued on. They were militarily occupied for 11 years. So it's hardly the idea of it's a civil conflict. You wouldn't militarily occupy a part of your country. And those sorts of points related to, and then go back before the war, you have the most integrated cities in the United States at the time were in the South. Cities like Charleston. You had slave-owning Blacks in Louisiana, Black people owning slaves. So keep going with this. In the North, it was illegal for free Blacks to enter. The state of Illinois, I think, had a $50 fine. In our money, it would be something like $5,000 for a free Black to try to enter the state of Illinois. They were banned. Very famously, John Randolph of Roanoke freed his slaves. And the will gave money to them, and they went to, and he had bought land in Ohio for them to settle and, have their own farms. The people in Ohio didn't want any Blacks living there, and they sent them home. So the idea that the North was this welcoming place where Black people were really welcome, and that they were all against slavery, and that the war was about slavery, Lincoln didn't make the war about slavery for a couple years. That was the flashpoint for it, but there were so many other tensions. If those of you who are outside the United States and have a desire to study it, there were so many other tensions relating to this. Slavery was the touch point, But if you went to a Union soldier and said, what is it that you're fighting for? Be it in 1860, 1861, 1862, he would not have said to free black slaves. That's factually inaccurate. And if you had asked a Confederate in 1860, 1861, 1862, what are you fighting for? They wouldn't say to keep black people in chains, right? It was the idea that we want our rights to determine our own country. And that's something that you have to understand about the US Constitution. It does not use the terms perpetual union. If you can join the union, you can leave the union. I think a friend of mine, I've always enjoyed this quote. He said, if the South was wrong, God save the king, right? So the United States can leave Britain, but Southern states, they're not allowed to leave the United States. So you have to see there's a logical incoherence there. Why would the South not be allowed to leave? They left in the same way that they joined. They had a constitutional convention, they had delegates, they voted, and then they left. That was it. And just because Fort Sumter was fired on doesn't mean that you have to go to war. It's not a death pact. Recently, we have an example. Recently, Turkey shot down one of Russia's planes. One could say, oh, well, they shot down a plane so they can go to war. That is a reason to go to war. But just because you're given a reason to do something doesn't mean that you should. And slavery all around the world was collapsing, peacefully, I might add. The United States was the only place where a bloody war was fought over it. The reality is, if the Confederacy had been allowed to go its own way, very likely the slavery system would have collapsed within years, because not only of the countries that didn't want to do business with a country that was in a what had started to become morally reprehensible, so the South wouldn't have any place to sell their goods and services, they would have said, okay, that's fine, we're going to get rid of it. And it could have collapsed on its own. Instead, what happened was a devastating war that killed 600,000 men on both sides, militarily devastated the South, devastated blacks and whites there for a very long time. And the scars led to what we would see in the segregation movement, and thankfully was resolved in some ways by the civil rights movement. But slavery was doomed. It just had to be allowed to pass out of existence, as it did everywhere else in the world except in the United States. But we weren't going to allow to do that. And I've often said that the United States' incursion into the Confederacy was a blueprint for the future, in which we invade other countries because we're morally superior, we militarily occupy them, and then we leave them worse than we found them. And the South was the first country to experience this. And it's that we've had, all the way up until Iraq, and we were invading because of WMD. We didn't find any WMD. Oh, okay. Well, we were invading to get women the right to vote and the right to drive. So the flag represents, not just for me, but for many people, not moral perfection at all, not a defense of slavery at all, but the right of self-determination. And I think that comes from the fact that I was born in Singapore, a former British colony. I have citizenship in the United States, a former British colony, and it's possible to leave and still succeed. You don't have to be part of a political entity. It's okay to leave a political entity peacefully. The South attempted to do that. They weren't allowed to do that, and there was a war as a result. And I think that's why I was in Scotland supporting the out referendum, the yes referendum. I was in London supporting Brexit. I am all for states determining for themselves. It doesn't mean that they're going to be successful. And if all it is about money and, oh, we're going to be economically worse off, that's not a reason to become independent. To become independent means that you're going to make your own decisions for better or for worse. And smaller countries with smaller governments are going to be more accountable, whereas larger entities, larger supranational organizations, they're going to be less accountable. And if people want to give this flag a hard time, I would say, look at the U.S. flag. Does the U.S. flag have such a great reputation worldwide? This is the flag that is responsible for bombing Pakistani wedding parties. This is the flag that's responsible for bombing civilians in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It's responsible for the CIA-backed overthrow of a democratically elected government in Iran, for the overthrow of the government of South Vietnam. So what does the US flag stand for? Does that mean that everyone in the United States supports that? So I think this rather long explanation for the short question of, I came here for Palestine and what is the Confederate flag doing in the corner, is It's just my trying to answer. Is it serious that someone would think that I would decry the apartheid state of Israel and that I would think that chattel slavery was a good thing? That doesn't even make any sense. So I, the war in the United States between 1861 and 1865 was a disaster for everyone, blacks and whites. It could have been avoided. We didn't. We chose violence, and that's what we got. So if you're going to clutch your pearls because of that flag, then this channel is not for you, and that's okay. But if you're willing to learn things that you were never taught in school, as I am, if you're willing to hear the other side, as I hope that I am, to a point, and if you're willing to put in the work of reading, which is really all this channel is about reading books and talking about them, then this channel is definitely for you. So please subscribe, please like this, please share this wherever you like, join the Patreon if you like, subs- um, buy something from the Amazon wish list, bump it up the review for me, and until next time, enjoy your reading.